right, this is our last, or almost our last, I think, lunch break live before the expo next week. Again, it's educationatl.com to get to the virtual expo next week, where we're going to have a ton of different stuff for you. Send you Nicole Young-Turner, who's going to be joining me today. There she is, right on cue. How you doing, Nicole?
Hey everyone. Hi Ian. I am doing well. How are you all?
Oh, fine. We're doing good. It's just longer weeks, feels like, but
Absolutely.
brighter days ahead. So, Nicole, I'm really excited to chat with you today, and honestly, this conversation couldn't come at a better time, probably. Given what's happened over the last couple weeks here in Atlanta, there's another scare yesterday, too. And the topic we wanted to dive into today is really about how do we build inclusive communities in our schools, because that's really where it starts. And that's where we can facilitate and cultivate acceptance and support and love, so that people grow up learning to respect one another. So I'm excited to talk to you today as we gear up for the virtual expo next week. And first and foremost, I want to give you a chance to share a little bit about your background and how did you get into education space in this work.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Ian, for just noting all of the social things that have been happening, and really providing space for that. Like everyone said, I am Nicole Young-Turner. I am a proud out educator, as well as the founder of Kaleidoscope Village. I actually started this journey as a student in Metro Atlanta. I identify as a Black woman. I also identify as a lesbian. And in 10th grade, I decided to come out and share my identity with my school community. I was immediately met with rejection, isolation, truly an experience that has stuck with me throughout my journey. And from that activation point, I decided that I really had to do something to your point, ensure that everyone from all backgrounds have spaces that are inclusive, and not just inclusive, but empowering. So I started teaching 5th grade up in Gwinnett County Public Schools about 8 years ago. And since then, I have been working with organizations as well as school leaders and educators in providing concrete strategies and best practices, as well as consulting and coaching around creating safe spaces and providing our students with positive representations of themselves. So that's a little bit about me and where my journey started.
I appreciate you sharing that. And obviously, it's a very personal journey for you. And that's honestly, whenever you meet someone who starts an organization or a program or a company, whatever it is, it almost always starts with their own personal experience. And so if you wouldn't mind shedding some more light on what that was like, and how did that ingrain in you this belief that you need to go and do this work when you come of age and become a professional. What were some of the high level things that you really drew out of that experience as a student that you're now putting into practice as a practitioner?
Absolutely. One thing that I noticed and became very aware of as a student and then as an educator as well is just this connection between the importance of students having role models and representation. Growing up, I grew up here in Atlanta, and I grew up really learning how to be proud of my Black identity, but I did not see any positive representations of what it meant to be LGBTQ. And so that is one thing that I'm bringing into my work with Kaleidoscope Village, is really showing and helping and equipping leaders and educators with the tools that it takes to truly integrate these representations into their schools. Another experience that I draw upon in my work is truly understanding that, administrators, as well as educators, often are not aware of the issues happening with LGBTQ students, because gender and affectional identity are not always visually identifiable. And so really understanding that many of our educators and school leaders and youth service providers need their own training and need their own learning journeys to be able to aptly support our students and not just not do harm, but also, again, affirm and empower them. And so that's something that we take with our full village approach, where we're working with school administrators and school and educators, as well as working with students and families to ensure that no matter where the student is, we are all acting in allyship and ensuring, again, that we have safe and affirming spaces for all folks, especially across our intersectional identities.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And you know, there's sort of an irony if you think about it. Today we talk a lot about social emotional learning, but to your point before, like, you know, I remember when I was a 9th and 10th grade teacher, and obviously high school is a very formative time, and when people are really just exploring themselves and their lives. And so, but I never felt equipped, nor did I feel like it was appropriate to step into any of those spaces or conversations, because it just didn't seem like I wasn't given direction or training on that, nor have we made it clear whether that's something that schools should be talking about. And I think with the social emotional learning push, whole child learning push, we're starting to realize that, like, we need to explore identity, not even just with marginalized groups, but with any child, right? Identity is such a key factor in growing up, to have confidence, to have belief, to find your purpose. And so I'm curious how you go about it with schools, and then have you started to explore that with them and saying, hey, this is also not just great for your students in these communities, but it's great for all of your students too. How do you guys approach that?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for uplifting that, right? A big part of this work is mindset shifting. We have, in many spaces, been raised that LGBTQ identity is not appropriate for school.
Right.
It's something that needs to be outside and left at the door. I posit first and foremost, LGBTQ students are our students, right? They're sitting in your classroom. They are our daughters and our sons and our siblings. And so when we talk about educating the whole child, we cannot ignore really, really important parts of our students' identities. And so I think just having those candid conversations and allowing space for our educators and our leaders to truly process and really shift some of these really deep-seated narratives, and I would say in some cases myths around what it means to be LGBTQ. I think that's definitely the first place that I start. I think another factor that we really look at is that we absolutely have data on how LGBTQ students are disproportionately disciplined, how they experience overwhelmingly. I mean, 80% LGBTQ students of color report hearing verbal harassment, not only from students, but also from their teachers. Just like you mentioned, right? We have some really, great folks who are aware of these issues, but not necessarily sure around what strategies to use. And so here at Kaleidoscope Village, we really peel back the layers and look at, what this teacher has been experiencing. And like you said, how we can call the entire community in being allies, right, in the movement. With the push for social emotional learning, it is very important that we have these conversations, again, not just with our LGBTQ students, but with all of our students, because we have seen that allyship is so important, and it is definitely, the beginning stages of, really transforming our schools and our societies. And so I definitely push our teachers to have these critical conversations with students and to truly, act in courage when they hear breaches and when they hear things that are not quite supportive, and really be open about, what's right and what's wrong, and help guide our students along a path that truly creates a world where we're all standing together. So those are just some of my kind of high level ways in which we work with schools and organizations to shift that mindset, and then come in with those tools and those strategies that teachers and educators can enact in the classroom and in the moment.
Yeah, that's amazing, because this is one of those things where, again, I feel like we focus so much on the students, themselves first, which is obviously significant, super important. But what people I feel like aren't realizing is that how schools approach creating inclusive community also sets the expectation of the other students of what community is meant to look like later in life.
Exactly.
Right? Like, if you're not actively creating an inclusive community for everybody and creating space to explore identity and accept identity, then the students who are not of that group, in this case the LGBTQ community, students who are not consider themselves members of that community, they're sitting there and taking this as a signal saying, okay, well, this is going to be something that it's not appropriate to talk about or open up, you know, well beyond school, right? And I think that's where people always fear the other, the unknown. And anytime we other, you know, different groups of folks, it creates this unnecessarily and unwarranted tension that leads to intolerance, ignorance, and all those things. What are some, like, so practically speaking, how do you dive into this with a staff? You know, because I think you know, people who check this out are going to be wondering, like, all right, I get the values behind this, I get why you're doing it, but how, you know, then they kind of might squirm their seat a little, trying to imagine, how do you actually do it with staff? So what's that process like in practice?
Absolutely. And thank you again so much for bringing up just the broader importance of this work, and how we are shaping students' mind right now around what the world can and should look like later. So yes, the process. So really important for, you know, us to really work with organizations and partners that truly want to do this work. I think that is just a key important first factor. And so our process first is to truly have focus groups, and not just discovery calls, but focus groups with leadership as well as staff. And we also send out surveys and assessments to truly get a pulse on how how staff and leadership are experiencing not only the school culture as it relates to LGBTQ inclusivity, but truly being honest around their tensions and how they may be experiencing barriers and pushback with families. And so we truly, again, take that assessment and look at where we find our larger areas of opportunities, and honestly where we need to start around staff training and building out what that looks like. So we do offer a suite of trainings, starting all the way with LGBTQ one-on-one, understanding affirming language, understanding what it means to create an inclusive physical as well as emotional environment. And so we start there to, again, build up that foundation and really start to kind of shape some of those mindsets, so that we can get into the work. Our next set of sessions are truly about digging into curriculum. So what it looks like to increase culturally relevant pedagogy throughout your curriculum. So I work with middle and high school, working right now mostly with social studies and English classes, but again, cracking open the books and really helping educators fill in those gaps and create a curriculum that is inclusive as well as a classroom environment. And then our last kind of suite of sessions that we facilitate are around allyship. And this is where we invite, again, the entire staff. We are hoping that the entire staff comes to all of these professional development opportunities. Sure. But the allyship piece is definitely for staff. And we also offer this piece to families as well, where we just talk about what it means to be an ally and what it looks like to really show up as an ally for LGBTQ students, but also students of color and just students in our community that may be experiencing, like you said, othering identities. And so again, that LGBTQ one-on-one, building our foundation, really getting in there, having some workshops around applicable strategies, and then broadening the scope to what it means to be an ally across the board and inviting families into that space. Another key piece of our work is the student-focused programming. So we are working with schools to set up in-school and or after-school pride alliances, which are safe spaces that are open to not only LGBTQ students, but students who want to learn more and want to learn how to be allies. And we just create, with the staff in the school, with the Pride Alliance sponsors, we create academically aligned as well as school values aligned programming to just truly empower our LGBTQ scholars to lead and advocate in their school environment. So again, looking at that 360 approach, where we're looking at staff, inviting families in, and ensuring that we're still holding students at the same time.
No, that's amazing, because it's one of those things where I think it's going to take a holistic approach, right? Like everybody has to have a role to play, because everybody does have a role to play, right? Like some people would sit back and say, oh, I'm tolerant, I'm accepting, like I don't need this. But it's, you can't be, I think we're learning more and more, and recent events obviously highlight this point exceptionally, that you can't be a bystander in this. There's no such thing as a bystander, right? Because if I'm asking you to support me and you're silent, then I assume you do not support me. It's not like, oh, I'm going to assume there's a silent majority behind me. And so we need more people to take active steps to at least like engage and learn a little bit, right? Because I think to your point and what you guys do with staff is a lot of people don't even know how to engage on the issue in the first place.
Right.
And given where culture is today, you know, canceling is like such a big thing right now, which I'd love to get your thoughts on that. But I think people in the middle who just don't really know how to engage with this, have never really talked about it, maybe didn't grow up around it.
Yep.
And sort of having those conversations, where do they begin, right? I think we need to be a little bit more generous in our grace we extend to folks right in that middle part.
Yep.
Saying, hey, look, I know this is uncomfortable. We're going to start with let's go over the jargon. Let's go with the language. Like, let's, you know, set the scene there. Is that how you guys approach with those fundamentals? And then do you think this cancel culture that's, you know, there's some good things in it, obviously, and there's some people taking it pretty far. Do you think that's having a chilling effect on folks' willingness to engage with these issues?
Absolutely. I am so glad you asked me about cancel culture because I think it really is like the iceberg of just things that honestly I as an LGBTQ person have experienced. It is the silencing of people's voices, right? It is making, you know, it is making folks' thoughts and opinions and perspectives mute. And although there are some folks we do not need to give a platform to, although there are some opinions we do not want to uplift, this phenomena has happened to folks in communities all the time. And I think that's where, you know, we have to be we have to be careful about the foundations of cancel culture and why we might be canceling someone. Because I can say throughout my life, I have been canceled for being LGBTQ, right? I have been canceled for being Black. In certain spaces, I have been canceled for being a woman. And so where do we draw the line of, you know, this is for justice or this is to give a platform to a voice that has been silenced? Or when are we actually just perpetuating the same oppression that we have over and over again? So to that end, I call for courage. You know, I think, you know, I do look and have a vision for the world where, you know, you don't have to be brave to be who you are, right? Because everyone accepts and respects and values difference. But right now, I think it is a call for courage. I think it is a call to understand that as an ally and as someone who is even aspiring to be an ally, right now there is some sacrifice, you know, on the line. You know, we do have to make some shifts and we do have to speak out and act out and make some steps forward that we may have been scared to make or that honestly we have been told would be detrimental to make. And so I think just operating with that mindset is just very important because I think, as you mentioned, just if one person is experiencing injustice, like nobody is going to be free. And so I think about like the spectrum of, you know, awareness is first, right? Really thinking about yourself, thinking about the messages you've received and what might be really behind the fear or behind, you know, some of these notions you may have about LGBTQ. And then the next step I definitely say is listening and learning from people and perspectives in the community. I think a lot of the times, many of us are like, oh, let me call up my gay friend, right? Like, I know this LGBTQ person. But no, we put out so many books and so much media that is appropriate, right? And so much information that I think you can begin to learn and engage in, you know, on your own if you are in a space where you're not ready to be in community. I think, but also that next step has to be action. It has to be arming yourself to be an ally and arming yourself to actually do some things and make some moves. Much like the teacher who got fired for putting up the rainbow flag in her classroom. This, you know, that is something that may happen, but that step of allyship meant so much and moved the movement so much more forward as an example. And so I don't want to just like keep going because I can definitely keep going and get really passionate. But I think, again, that action is really important. And that's where Kaleidoscope Village comes in. We actually offer those concrete strategies, best practices, not just tried and true, but also very informed by the community and help educators implement that. And then we're also here as a support system because we know everything is not, you know, checkbox, silver bullet solutions. And so we're here to help educators and school leaders really navigate issues with parents and issues that may arise with students as they are advocating and acting on some of these strategies that they have become aware of.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much that you packed in there that I want to talk about. I'll go back to the cancel culture for a second because I think, to your point, like we have to have courage to not cancel immediately, right? Like, and I 100% agree. Obviously, like certain opinions, we do not want to uplift. But beyond that, whenever you cancel somebody, and in this sense, we're talking about really silencing them, what you're doing is a couple of things. One, you're hardening the opposition against you because you're not engaging with them. And two, it's having a chilling effect even on people who are maybe on your side too, because they don't want to speak up either, even if it's just to be an ally. Like,
Right.
I know that because, I try to be an ally, I try to engage with these issues personally, and at the same time, I'm wary of speaking up to even support the movements with for fear of doing something wrong. And the other reason I think cancel culture is so detrimental to the long-term goals that we all collectively have is that it turns it eliminates discussion as sort of the battlefield, right? And it makes it about other things, and obviously bigger things like policy have to be a part of the conversation, but it's got to start with engagement from a purely like human level. And if once you eliminate that, then this is what I think is leading to things like Republicans not trying to win our votes, but trying to just eliminate the votes, right? Or like make it harder to vote because we've made it so we've convinced people we can't convince each other of things anymore. And so you just go with your gut, pick a side, and that's it. And I think that's so detrimental to. Honestly, it's not what activists like yourself are trying to create. It's not what people who want to be allies and want to have a positive community are trying to create. And so I applaud the fact that you all start really trying to create space to just engage in those spaces first and foremost.
And I'm sorry, I actually want to bring up that point too, around just our approach around building coalitions and starting from communities. I live in Atlanta, born and raised in Atlanta, and Atlanta has been known nationally as being a really open and free gay city. And I do not doubt that that is absolutely true. But what we have seen with LGBTQ movements, not just across the country, but just over the years, is that there has been a top-down approach, right? Where there are policies being made and things being done, but it hasn't actually trickled into our schools, right? It hasn't actually trickled into our workplaces. And so I just thought you brought up a really good point around how the culture is shifting, and Kaleidoscope Village is truly trying to shift it back and give the power back to the people and ensure that those voices are being heard as these decisions are being made and folks are kind of closing their ears,
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think one of the things that's troubling me is the way that education shifts. Obviously we're still in this heavily accountability-driven model of education, and even social emotional learning, which has a lot of support right now, is being done, in my opinion, in a very haphazard and kind of blunt fashion. Let's just teach the teachers how to do SEL, and then they'll do that also. And it's like I taught world history. I did cover 10,000 years of world history in 2 semesters, and I could barely, teach the students how to critically write and think alongside that. Trying to get me to incorporate social emotional learning into that also is just another peak to climb that I didn't have the resources or time to do that. And so I'm concerned that when we should be talking about identity for kids in all spaces in all ways, and we should be doing it earlier. Do you have confidence or optimism that things like this, a lot of people in the entrepreneurial world talk about is something a nice to have or a must have, right? And I think you and I would agree that exploring identity and establishing inclusive communities in schools to us seems like a must have because of what it sets us up for long term as a society. But not everybody would argue that, right? Because of testing and because of the things that like measure school impact and success. Like, are you worried about this too? Or am I just freaking out? Or do you feel like we can make building inclusive community a must have for our schools?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely something that's been on my mind for the past decade, right? Being in education. It is absolutely a must have. And I think that argument where it's a nice to have and like it's an extra layer, I think that's where there's a blind spot. Our kindergartners are learning about identity the first day of school, right? Our kindergartners are learning about gender differences, right? Our kindergartners are learning, and our pre-K students, right, are learning about what constitutes a family. Our pre-K students and our babies, right, are being told, oh yeah, you're gonna have a girlfriend one day. So these things start as soon as someone is born. And so while we like to compartmentalize and say identity, you know, is something that's outside of the core subjects, it is integrated in such a inextricable way that we can no longer ignore that the ways in which we have been teaching and helping our students explore identity have been privileging and basically privileging and uplifting one identity, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. Absolutely.
And so, you know, when I think about that argument, I do have to push back and say it is essential and it is absolutely the bedrock of our education system. We need to just be more expansive, right, and more inclusive, because when we're not, we're actually doing harm. And as educators, we do not want to do harm. We take the oath, much like doctors, right? Like, we do not want to do harm.
We should take the oath, yeah.
Well, so many of us take the heart oath, right, to not do harm. And so when we look at, you know, just the data, right, I love data. And I think data absolutely does drive progress in certain spaces in education. When we look at the data of our LGBTQ students of color literally, you know, dropping out 3 times the rate of our students, our heterosexual students of color, which is 5 times the rate of our white students that are LGBTQ. When we look at, you know, the fact that just one out teacher in a school can literally drop suicide rates 40%. I'm working with a school partner right now. It's been really amazing looking at all types of different data to understand students' experiences. But even when you look at students' Google searches, right, we see some things that are truly showing that SEL is not only a nice to have enrichment. This is truly about saving our students' lives first, and then helping our students understand how to navigate this world and perform to their top and best potential. And that's what we as educators want. And so I think we've been missing the mark and kind of being blind to a certain aspect of the fact that this is what we do, and we have been ignoring and or harming a group of our students.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it's so hard to get folks to understand this, especially if you're a white person like myself, where it's hard to understand the fact that a system that was designed by only people like myself will then be I'll just, in the simplest way to put it, be best suited for people who look and like myself and come from that background. And if you try to create that in other spaces, like it starts to get through, I think, but it's hard to people to really grasp because it's so deep, right? Like it's to really question the entire environment and culture that's built in a school. And then because people are throwing around white supremacy so much as a topic, and that obviously, you know, triggers a lot of different feelings and memories. And nobody wants to consider themselves a white supremacist outside of, you know, the unfortunate folks who do. But to your point, I think the takeaway is that we're already doing this, right? We're already doing it inadvertently. People, and you know, this is one of the things I was talking to a friend about our parents the other day, and you know, my dad, who's extremely loving and supporting, he's great. He said something to me like several years ago in passing about something I was working on, and then you know, several years later it came up, and you know, he thought I was being sensitive about it. And what I was trying to tell him is like, no, we hear you. Like I listened to what you said and I remembered it. And that's how kids are too, right? Like they pay attention, they're perceptive, they you know, and that's why we tell them we should be reading to our students really young when they can't even read. It's because this stuff matters and there's an osmosis that occurs. And so to your point, to pretend like it's not occurring is detrimental. Right. And I think I haven't published this yet because I don't know if I want to, but I wrote a little like piece about, it's about how, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about it. But generally, I feel like the old way the system was built really has cultivated this sense of self-loathing for so many of us, right? Like you're taught to conform, standardize, try to be like everybody else. And that's so damaging to people of all stripes, right? And, you know, a lot of folks are trying to push for new visions of school models. what role does this have to play, do you think, in a new vision? If you were to recreate a school model, like what role would creating this community have as part of that?
Oh, an essential role, absolutely essential role. I think, as we become more visible as a community, thankfully to some, again, appropriate media, but I have some issues with some media representation. But again,
Sure.
as we continue to become more visible and these issues are more aware, we are realizing that like this, our community is not a community to be sat to the side. Like we are, a very
Right.
essential core piece of every community. Um, and so I think when you're thinking about culture in a school, really understanding the specific issues and challenges of LGBTQ students and the specific needs and ways to empower them through their identity, because of their identity and not despite their identity,
Right.
is
Right.
key.
Yeah.
One really foundational thing that I think kind of shakes folks up in our foundational session is just truly understanding that, gender and affectional orientation are things you are born with, period. And so when we are thinking about an elementary school and creating new systems and creating an entire new, organization, we have to be very, very pointed about not just being aware, but integrating these policies and these practices into our work. One thing I see a lot, which, I don't want to have call out culture, but I'm calling some of my great entrepreneurs in,
Sure.
is that, when we understand more about gender, what does that mean about these gender-based school models, right? What does that mean about
Yeah.
how we're teaching boys in these schools to act like men and how we're teaching girls in these schools to act like girls, right? I think
Right. Sure.
once we have this mindset shift, things will truly start to change on a systemic level. Another thing that I'm thinking about is dress code, which are, I know we talk about things in large theory, but these are very particular issues that I think we can begin to have conversations around and actually make change around. What do you mean when only boys can wear pants? Who is a boy, right? And so I think when we start with that awareness and we start with that self-reflection and understanding the foundations,
Right.
many of the ways in which we are socializing our students and even continuously socializing ourselves will start to be, illuminated. And then that's when I think, coalition building and being in a community and standing in solidarity with the community and not just kind of advocating by yourself on the side
Yeah.
will be important as we continue to sustain it. But it
Yeah.
is core, foundational, and so important.
Yeah. I think without a doubt, absolutely in agreement there. And the gender specific programming, I'll call it, as a person who founded an organization that does that, I it's such an interesting conversation. And I totally get where you're coming from. And one of the things we struggled too with was how much are we trying to help our students adapt to the system they currently live in versus yeah, and but also versus realizing a completely new vision of a community. So,
Yep.
I think at least what we want to do in the intermediate term is provide options, right? And
Yes.
provide inclusivity because, I think we want to create spaces for students to explore themselves. We want to create spaces that family feel like safe and secure in these things, right? Like, if the school has the options of all these different things, at least they know that their student can choose what is best for them.
Exactly.
And I think that's your point. It's not that we should outlaw certain things. It's more of just like as we work our way towards a new understanding across culture, we need to provide more openness and opportunities in the school building, right?
Absolutely.
And in the school community. So that's such a powerful thing. I would like to close with, this is one of the things we've been asking in some of our insight conversations, but I want to challenge you with it as we gear up for the expo next week. And again, I've been talking with Nicole Young-Turner here from Kaleidoscope Village. They do a lot of consulting work with schools and teachers to create inclusive communities, especially for the LGBTQ community within a school building. And we're gearing up for this virtual ATL Education Expo next week. It's all going to take place at educationatl.com. And one of the questions we are wrestling with is if we think ahead to the year 2050, right? So about 30 years from now, what do we think education should look like by then? I think oftentimes we're like, oh, what should education look like in general? But by putting a year on it, I'm trying to set a stake in the ground saying, all right, what does it need to look like by then? So at least now we have, you know, the first part of a SMART goal, which is that deadline for ourselves. So what do you think it should look like that by then? You know, it didn't have to be too specific, just generally speaking.
Yeah, I'm thinking wise, right? I think younger Nicole would have been like, by 2050, like all of this needs to be different, right? But I know that this arc in this journey is long. So for, I would say in 29 years, I absolutely, my vision is that education has space for folks from all different backgrounds and truly empowers folks to be who they are. You know, just empowers folks through who they are, and not teach people to be to close down spaces and places of who they are, to be successful. Sorry, I know that was a little bit choppy. You know, I definitely hope that there is a space where not only, you know, affectional identity and gender identity, but like neurodiversity and, you know, really people from all different abilities can come into a space and learn from each other. I am looking forward to a more collaborative modality in education where it's not top down and the teacher doesn't know everything. And so I'm really excited about, again, this just expansion of what it means to be successful, this expansion of what it means to be a leader, this expansion of what it means to deserve support and deserve to be empowered. In a space where we are all learning from each other and actively listening. And also, like, maybe not getting rid of data, but utilizing data to actually liberate versus oppress.
Yeah, I love that. I think the word expansion is maybe the theme I'll take away from this, just because people just, a lot of times they think it's either or a zero sum, when in reality, it's, no, we just need to be additive, right? We need to build on what we have, as opposed to, you know, starting from scratch or eliminating things. Nicole, this has been really wonderful. I appreciate the time. We're going to get this. I unfortunately, yesterday I messed up with Anthony, my previous guest, and I didn't hit the share to IGTV thing. I'm going to make sure to do that for this. And we're going to put it on the website as well for those who haven't checked it out today. More of this to come at the expo next week, educationatl.com. But most importantly, Nicole Young-Turner with Kaleidoscope Village. They do amazing work. So hopefully some folks will engage with them as a result of all this.
Yes, please follow us at Kaleidoscope Village. And thank you, Tara. This was my first IG Live.
It was great.
So excited.
International. It was great. All right, Nicole.
Have a good day.
We'll talk to you soon.